but like understanding that what we're doing right now has that ripple effect, right? So like when we're talking about cycle breaking, look at our history. Like, so Canada, what the country known as Canada, it's formed, I think it was like 155-ish, something like that, years ago, right? So think of like the formation of a country. This is a baby country of 150 years. In that time, they've come, and like colonized the crap out of this entire like land. And in that short period of time have brought Eurocentric values, completely opposite values from Indigenous worldviews, Indigenous ways of knowing and being and healing. Right? So in that time, think about all of the changes that were made to bring people off the land. So now they're on reservations. They've signed treaties. So then there's agreements with the government or the crown and these people. They've mandated residential schools. So they've mandated it so that those kids would be taken and removed, right, from their families, from their communities, because it was an assimilation practice, right? Think of the mindset that needed to be in place for the people who are, starting this country in Confederacy, that they think assimilation is what they have to do, and treating Indigenous people as if they're subhuman, that they're wards of the state, right? So that we have to be cared for like we're subhuman. Think of all that mindset, right? And that's within the last like 2 generations. Think of the generations that came to formulate. So we have that. Now we're at this like, okay, now we're sitting, displaced, disconnected, disheartened. And we say, like, these are none of the things that I want for my life. I want to be out back on the land. I want to be connected to medicines. I want my kids to know their own territory. I want them to understand where the streams are, where the mountains are, where the medicine is, right? And when I'm saying medicine, it doesn't mean just plants. It means like being out, connected, right? That's huge. A huge part of the healing for us is not, I don't want to say reinstating, because that's not it's like reclamation. It's saying like we understood there was the vibration of the tree, the vibration of the grass, the vibration of the berries, the vibration of the animals. All of those things affected our internal vibration, that our energy signature would have been so much higher than where we are right now because of intergenerational trauma, right? So colonial practices, which do not jive with our ways of viewing the world, our worldviews and our ways of being, and then trying to find, like, right now, the job is going, okay, like, what makes sense to us, what was healing for us, and what kept us for millennia, and what's imposed on us, and what doesn't make sense. And we're not blaming, shaming any specific people. It's a colonial mindset, right? That doesn't go intact with our worldviews. What we base our life on is ancestral matriarchal law, right? Ancestral matriarchal law is connected to natural law. It's connected to spiritual law. All of the things that stem from those 2 laws stem out to our families, and then our family systems and our governance systems are all based off of natural law. When you take a colonial system, which isn't based on those things, it's on patriarchy, right, and on accumulation of wealth, on extraction, that's complete opposite, right? Which causes so much disharmony within our relationship to the land, relationship to each other, relationship with our parents. You take us off the land and put us on reservations, so it might not be our traditional territory that we have intimate knowledge and relationship and connection to. And then you take our kids from there and put them into industrial schools or residential schools. Think of all those different levels of disconnection from the medicine that it is living on the land. So there's a lot of stereotypes around Indigenous people about being in poverty, about being, in addictions all the time, about being bad parents. Where do you think that comes from? Is that all and there's never any acknowledgement when people do talk about Indigenous people or Native people with those stereotypes. They don't ever look at the loss, all the losses that their ancestors and even them, right? Like one thing we brought, like when I do education around intergenerational trauma, I bring up residential schools or industrial schools were opened in like 1870s and didn't close until 1996. The last one closed in 1996. Kia, you and I were both alive during that time,
Girl, I
right?
was in
How?
the military. I was grown, a
Yeah,
young adult, but a grown
yeah.
adult.
Yeah. I would have been about 11. So I was like, that means that I would have gone to residential school, right? Like, had I been in just a different province than I was, I would have gone to residential school because of that when they closed them down, right? And they didn't close them down at first because they thought that they were harming anybody. They were just like, like, we're starting to run out of money. And then they're like, oh, now there's some reports, oh, maybe we should start to back out of it. The Canadian government, but the churches they were still running them. And then, like I said, 1996. So people want to put this as history, right? This is a bad chapter in our history, blah, blah, blah. This was like what our prime minister was quoted saying in 2020 when they recovered the 215 child remains from the Kamloops residential school, right? They
Remember
found
that.
a burial site and they had remains, or they had markers that were likely child remains, right? And they've gone all across Canada. They've started to do ground penetrating radar in different places around residential schools that corroborate the stories of residential school survivors who have said, hey, like, we know that there's a burial site over there. We were little kids and we had to bury our friends because this was part of our duties, right? So
Oh
they've
my
gone
God.
in. So just think about that, right? Think about all of that removal. After residential school, they had 60 scoop. So 60 scoop is like in the 1960s. So people are coming, some of them are coming back home from residential schools because they're slowly closing, right? There's still lots of them running, but they're slowly closing. Then they come back to these parents who have had their kids removed. These kids have gone to school. They don't know their own language. They don't know their culture. There's like, they've been removed from that. They come back and then there's disharmony. Think of if somebody took your kid right now, Kia, how do you think that would leave you?
Complete.
And 5 years later, your kid comes back.
And
You
then
don't
you're
have,
strangers.
yeah. And then, so there's all of the, like, so there, and then sometimes these kids were like sent other places, right? So, and then they went from going, okay, we can't take them and put them in residential school. How can we take them now? And then it was through the child welfare system. So then there's an uptake of kids getting brought into the child welfare system. And then, so that's what they call them, the 60 scoop. So between like the 1960s and 1980s, a big uptake. There was little to no Indigenous kids in the system, and it was typical, or it was mainly people that would have been classified as Canadians, and then an uptake of Indigenous kids. And then now they have something called the millennial scoop. So it's the overrepresentation of Indigenous children right now in the child welfare system. So I think it was like the 2017 census or something, like my brain's can't remember all the dates, but there was like close to 15,000 Indigenous children all across Canada. It's more than 50, so it's like 52% of kids that are in the care of the Ministry of Children and Family Services, so child welfare, from 0 to 14 are Indigenous kids. So like the targeting of the systemic racism, the underprovision of social services on reservation and within communities, and barriers for Indigenous people to receive services for support, all contribute to that overrepresentation. All of these ways that we've been removed. So think when we're talking about that intergenerational trauma,
Mm-hmm.
so we need to take a breath for a second. I always get a little bit worked up when I talk about this, but my family's come forward and we're very open and honest about how this has impacted us. So my mom was removed from my grandparents, right? They had stuff happen there. My mom was removed from them. She was put into foster care. In the foster home, she was raped, and then she got pregnant with my brother, and then she ended up having, more children. So the three of us older kids, and then my brother was taken from my mom because she was young when this happened. She was 14 when she got. The lady took my brother and my mom in at the same time. And then eventually she had me and my sister, which was a few years later. That family had moved with my brother across Canada. So we were originally East Coast, born East Coast, but we lived West Coast and lived mostly our lives there. My mom got a phone call to say, hey, your son's going to start kindergarten or going to start school pretty soon. Would you like to come and see him? So then she moved me and my sister away from a home life that was not safe and not cool and brought us here. And then eventually I had experiences with my ex-husband. We had lots of hardship, and then had trauma happen, had family violence happen, which had never happened the whole time we were together, but had an incident, and then had the ministry involvement, RCMP, which is our police department, involved, and then my children were removed from my care. They were removed for a short period of time, for like 5 months. They were worried about, nobody had harmed them, nobody had touched them. Three of them witnessed my ex-husband threatening to kill me, after many things that got to that point that happened. And they ended up removing them, worried about my mental health. That's what they said. They worried that my mental health was impacted. And I was like, it's going to be even more impacted because now you've taken my kids away from me. But you look at it, my grandparents have experienced it. My parents have experienced it. Now I have experienced it. Right. And it's, when we're looking at cycle breaking now, this is part of it, is what actions do I have to take to correct it, right? What actions do I have to take now to, one, prevent it from ever happening again, and from it happening to other people, without going into the whole story, but the day before I found out the kids were going to come back to me, I prayed about it, right? This whole time, these 5 months, it was the worst experience of trauma I've ever experienced in my life, having them taken away. You know me, I'm there for my kids. I'm a huge advocate. I'm a nurse. I'm doing all these things. And this incident happened, and it caused so much trauma. But the day before I got my kids back, I remember praying, and I didn't know that they were going to be able to come back, right? They had told me that we're going to be talking about all these different things that they wanted to do. So I was praying about it, and I could hear the words, transform this for them. And I remember being like, what does that mean at first, right?
Wow.
And it was
Yeah.
transform this for them so that it never happens again to them, but also so that it never happens to another kid again. So yeah, I, as a cycle breaker, was like, not judgment on my mom and not judgment on my grandmother. I had taken that time to start learning about, how the heck does this keep happening? I'm educated. My ex-husband was educated. We went to church. We were trying to advocate for our children. We had the money to take care of them. And, I'm not painting a rosy picture in any way, shape, or form, but we were doing the